jedno i drugo.
Sunflower Sutra. I walked on the banks of the Tin Can Banana Dock and sat down under the huge shade of a Southern Pacific locomotive to look at the sunset over the Box House Hills and cry. Jack Kerouac sat beside me on a busted, rusty iron pole companion. We thought the same thoughts of the soul, bleak and blue and sad-eyed, surrounded by the gnarled steel roots of trees of machinery. The oily water on the river mirrored the red sky. Sun sank on top of final Frisco peaks. No fish in that stream, no hermit in those mounts, just ourselves roomy-eyed and hungover like old bums on the river bank. Tired and wily. Look at the sunflower, he said. There was a dead gray shadow against the sky, big as a man, sitting dry on top of a pile of ancient sawdust. I rushed up enchanted. It was my first sunflower. Memories of Blake, my visions, Harlem, and hells of the eastern rivers, bridges clanking Joe's greasy sandwiches, dead baby carriages, black treadless tires forgotten and unretreaded, the poem of the river bank, condoms and pots, steel knives. Nothing stainless, only the dank muck and the razor-sharp artifacts passing into the past, and the gray sunflower poised against the sunset, crackly, bleak, and old with the dusty smut and smog and smoke of olden locomotives in its eye, corolla of bleary spikes pushed down and battered like a broken crown, seeds fallen out of its face, soon to be toothless mouth of sunny air, sun rays obliterated on its hairy head like a dried wire spider web, leaves stuck out like arms out of the stem, gestures from the sawdust root, broke pieces of plaster fallen out of the black twigs, a dead fly in its ear, unholy battered old thing you were, my sunflower. Oh, my soul, I loved you then.
Драги учесници, драги гости и посетители, добитникот на наградата Златен венец на Струшките вечери на поезијата, американскиот поет Ален Гинзберг.
Ја имам високата чест од овој космополитски мост, од мостот на поезијата, да му ја врачам наградата Златен венец на Ален Гинзберг.
Hum, hum, hum. Blessed be the muses for their descent, dancing around my desk, crowning my balding head with laurel. In Tibetan, Japanese, Chinese, Buddhist practice, there is three special centers of awareness. Om, relating to the body. Ah, relating to speech. Hum, relating to mind. The ah vibrates in the larynx or throat, relating to speech. And ah is good for poetry because it is appreciation of speech. So speech and poetry is considered sacred, sacramental, sacred, sven, because it unites the worlds. So they take poetry very seriously. It is a nice way, a good way of thinking about it, about poetry. Millions of babies watching the skies, bellies swollen, with big round eyes on Jessore Road. Long bamboo huts, no place to shit but sand channel ruts. Millions of fathers in rain, millions of mothers in pain, millions of brothers in war, millions of sisters nowhere to go. 1 million aunts are dying for bread. 1 million uncles lamenting the dead. Grandfather millions homeless and sad. Grandmother millions silently mad. Millions of daughters walk in the flood. Millions of children wash in the mud. 1 million girls vomit and groan. Millions of families hopeless alone. Millions of souls, 1971. Homeless on Jessore Road under gray sun. 1 million are dead. 1 million who can walk toward Calcutta from East Pakistan. Taxi September along Jessore Road. Ox cart skeletons drag charcoal load. Past watery fields through rain flood ruts. Dung cakes on tree trunks, plastic roof huts. Wet processions, families walk. Stunted boys, big heads don't talk. Look, bony skulls and starving black eyes. Starving black angels in human disguise. Mother squats weeping and points to her sons, standing thin-legged like elderly nuns. Small-bodied hands to their mouths in prayer. 5 months more food since they settled there on 1 floor mat with a small empty pot. Father lifts up his hands at their lot. Tears come to their mother's eye. Pain makes father Maya cry. 2 children together in palm-proof shade stare at me. No word is said. Rice ration, lentil.
Would you like to tell for our auditorium and sympathies of poetry, what does mean the prize Golden Caron for you? In fact, how did you feel after you had learned that you are awarded of this literature recognition?
Well, I learned it in December when I was in Moscow, and I was just denied a visa there. So it was very helpful in getting my visa in Moscow renewed. So it had some practical use. Long ago, in Mexico, I met Vasco Popa.
Yeah.
And we read together. And he said, I hope someday you will be invited to Struga. But I don't think he realized that I would get the Golden Leaf. But also it is useful because I came as vice president of American Pen Club
Is it so?
to inquire about situation of Yugoslavian writers. And also I came as Buddhist to encourage people to meditate, to calm their minds and increase their sense of reality. And also I came as poet to encourage people to expand their verse line and have unobstructed breath.
Okay.
Big breath.
Circle sneaks one skinny run, 2 brothers dance forward on the mud stage.
To get a Golden Leaf is a great honor. and I like many of the poets who have won before. I knew W.H. Auden, and one of his friends and close companions is here, Alan Anson, and Giervik I have met before.
Giervik is here.
Woznicienski is an old friend for 20 years, and we have traveled together. Bulat
Akujava is here too.
is here, and I met him in 1965 in Moscow.
No more bread today. Thousands of children at once.
So a very good situation, both for poetry and for meditation and for making love, I hope.
I don't know about that.
For poetry, good situation for poetry, for meditation, and I hope for making love. And apparently, Ohrid is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe.
Right.
Certainly in Yugoslavia, in Dubrovnik.
Yes.
So it is nice to be an old dog in Dubrovnik.
In Ohrid.
I mean in Ohrid, pardon me. An old dog in Struga.
Newborn lay naked on mother's thin laps. Monkey-sized, week-old, rheumatic babe high. Gastroenteritis, blood poison, thousands must die. September, Jessor, Road, Rickshaw.
I enjoy the play of contradictions. I write about my family, but I am a homosexual. I come from a capitalist world.
Open drains and wet families waiting for food. Border trucks flooded.
I have experimented with drugs. I have experimented with LSD, but I practice Buddhist meditation. I am of Slavic parentage. My mother was born in Vitebsk, and my father's family from Lvov. But I am an American beatnik. I am Jewish, but I am also non-theistic. No, non-theistic. Non-theist.
Armies of gold, millionaire navies, merciful gold, bringing us medicine and relief.
Do I contradict myself?
And causing more grief.
Very well.
Where
I contradict myself.
tears? Oh, wait,
I am large. I contain multitudes.
where can these families
I also contain contradictions,
Jess or Rose
but they do not tear my body apart.
big eyes? Where will we sleep when our father dies? Whom shall we pray to for rice
In
and
fact, my
for
problems of
care?
identity
Who
are
can
very
bring
minor
to this
compared
ship flood full leer?
to the problem of the identity of the whole world, or its survival. So we are all in the same soup, animal soup. So the only way to relate to these contradictions is with sense of humor and realizing that these thoughts, contradictory thoughts, are only thoughts. So therefore, the answer is not to get trapped in your own thoughts. And this has been the ideological problem of the heterosexuals, the homosexuals, the capitalists, and all the churches of the world. So empty mind is the answer. Empty mind. That way you can look at your thoughts without being trapped by them.
Do you believe in the power of poetry? Because you
To do what?
gave us a picture now of a mixture of your conception of the world, right?
Yes. The question, as I understand, is what is the power of poetry? The poet can make a model of his own mind. Like present his thoughts one after another as they rise and disappear. The politician is not able to present his own mind. The poet's job is to present his actual mind, his private mind, and to speak in public the way he thinks in private. This is what Walt Whitman asked for. His word for it was in English, candor, because we all have the same confusion, because we all endure the same suffering of being in a human body, because we are all vulnerable in our hearts, because we all live in some pain. If the poet speaks with candor, other people recognize their own situation. Understanding the common situation, there is more sense of compassion, more sense of not wanting to hurt more. Not wanting to make it worse than it already is. So there is the power of poetry state the common ground, to present the common ground. So that people understand each other more clearly. Candor ends paranoia. Candor ends paranoia.
Би ве замолил сега специјално за гледачите на Југословенската радиотелевизија да кажете првата своја песна по вашето доаѓање во Струѓа.
One that I have written already or one that I should write
Дали
now?
оно што ја напишал или што сега треба да напише?
Glittering soda water. Glittering soda water. Brilliant imperial lights, floodlights, brilliant imperial floodlights, cigarette smoke rising through the illumination, Cyrillic headlines, universal paranoia reflected in the mirrored walls, everybody's mind completely empty. Empty like the blue sky over Lake Ohrid.
But what do you think of his generation now, let's say 40 years younger than you?
That was the generation that was born in the years when the Howl was published for the first time.
Yeah.
I like to sleep with them. First thought, best thought.
Mr. Ginzberg, I would like to ask you several questions about your work. First one, what do you mean by first thought, best thought?
When I write, my method is to try and remember thoughts that I just had, rather than inventing a thought, but to copy the nature, like Cézanne copied his landscape, to copy the landscape in my mind. So I don't invent a poem, I remember what I thought. And the problem is, how can we write down every thought that we have? Well, we can't. but we can remember the thoughts that are most vivid, most brilliant, most clear, the ones that return to us automatically without our asking, like of Belgrade on my visit of 1980. One thing I remember is looking down on the confluence of the rivers, where the Danube was, where the Turks were stopped. So those pictures remain whether I ask for them or not. So first thought, best thought is a way of selecting from your mind those things that stay with you. And then you simply be the stenographer of your mind. It's just that I put my attention to looking at it and to noticing it and to noticing what I notice.
Okay.
So Joyce was trying to make a synthetic imitation of consciousness, and I am trying to be the stenographer of my own direct experience. I attempted to concentrate the total sun's rays in each poem as through a glass, but such magnification did not set the page afire. By my bedside, I keep a big notebook to write down dreams, or in the morning when I wake, or before I go to bed, to write down whatever has preoccupied me during the day, what I most vividly remember from the whole day. And most of my work is done in a big notebook at my bedside.
Yeah, what about the method?
The method is, just as I set my pen to the paper, the thought that is present in my head at that second, I begin with that thought. And then as I continue, whatever thoughts rise during the time of writing, I feed into the verse line of the poem. So we never know what we're going to think next. So because of that, there's always an element of surprise to me and to the reader. Oh, Russian-faced, woman on the grass, your long black hair is crowned with flowers. The mandolin is on your knees. Communist beauty, sit here married in the summer among daisies, promised happiness at hand. Holy Mother, now you smile on your love. Your world is born anew. Children run naked in a field spotted with dandelions. They eat in the plum tree grove at the end of the meadow and find a cabin where a white-haired Negro teaches the mystery of his rain barrel. Blessed daughter, come to America. I long to hear your voice again, remembering your mother's music in the song of the natural front. Oh, glorious muse that bore me from the womb, gave suck first mystic life, and taught me talk and music, from whose pained head I first took vision, tortured and beaten in the skull. What mad hallucinations of the damned that drive me out of my own skull to seek eternity till I find peace for thee, O poetry, and for all humankind, call on the origin.
Okay, next question would be, your poetry still is a poetry of suffering, and especially we are aware of different diasporic experiences of whole nations.
Yeah.
In this sense, can you make art out of suffering?
Yeah.
And do you find any relations in the Macedonian art according to that, and in your poetry according to the matter of suffering in poetry? As
Well,
you said, you suffered a lot because of your mother,
yeah.
you know, and you said that that was the art.
Well,
Yeah.
The Macedonians have suffered diaspora dismemberment, as the Jews have suffered,
Yeah.
as all mankind has suffered.
Yeah.
Mankind himself has destroyed many species. It's not just that species eat each other, it's that we are the worst predators and have destroyed huge masses of living creatures whose information will never be available to us again. Because in each species there is encoded billions of years of experience and development. And the planet itself is hanging between life and death because of our hyper-rationalism, which is an anxiety or suffering that everybody experiences. But in the long run, we all die anyway, And that's the ultimate cost of suffering. As I said in a recent song, Blues, I'm alone in the sky where there's nothing to lose. The sun's not eternal. That's why there's the blues. So suffering is built into existence. As my mother died in a mental hospital, then that is the fact of my life, so I'll write about that. And in that way, the suffering becomes transformed and is no longer such great suffering, but is a source of insight and wisdom and energy and communication to other people. So the suffering comes, in a way, from being secret. And all the world is carrying secret, especially, I would say, in those nations involved with the Cold War. There's this anxiety and secrecy, maybe caused by the presence of the nuclear bomb that everybody's afraid of. So the only way to get out of that is to be completely frank, completely open, completely honest, and tell about your inside personal life, like Whitman, your inside thoughts, your secret thoughts. As Whitman said, none of suffering, just what are your secret thoughts? Self-examination. Self-examination.
Orelski krilja kak da si metneh I v naši strni da si preletneh. Na naši mesta ja da si idam, da vidam Stambol, Kukuš da vidam. Da vidam da li sunce I tamo mračno ugrevjat kako I vamo. Ako kako ovde sunce me sretit, ako pak mračno sunce to svetit, na put dalečni jake se stegnam I v drugi strani ke si pobegnam, kade sunce to svetlo ugrevjat, kade nebo to zvezdi posevjat.
I attempted to concentrate the total sun's rays in each poem as through a glass, but such magnification did not set the page afire. Blessed be the muses for their descent, dancing around my desk, crowning my balding head with laurel. Manifesto. Let me say, beginning, I don't believe in the soul. The heart, famous heart's a bag of shit, I wrote 25 years ago. Oh, my immortal soul, youthful poet Shelley cried. Oh, my immortal ego. Little knowing he didn't believe in God, neither do I, nor all science, reason, ideology, reality, and good moral will, collections of empty atoms, as Kerouac Buddha scribed. Neither does great love, immortal love, defy pain, nightmare, death, torture, Saigon police, underground press, Pravda, Bill of Rights. And while we're at it, let's denounce democracy, fascism, communism, and heroes. Art is not empty if it shows its own emptiness. Poetry, useful, leaves its own skeleton hanging in the air, like Buddha, Shakespeare, and Rimbaud. Serious, dispense with law, accept cause and effect, and even the latter has exceptions. No, cause and effect is not foolproof. There is awareness, which confounds the soul, heart, God, science, love, governments, and cause and effect nightmare. Happening now? End of Earth? Apocalypse days? President says Armageddon. $254 billion military budget. The 5 a.m. subway train leaves Times Square crowded with murderers and corpses, sitting in dress suits, earphones listening to mechanical disco, the infinite deaf universe of Walkman. Happening now, while I drink Perrier at parties in Bel Air, neutron bombs, nerve bacteria gas, fruit fly recombinant germplasm, stratospheric X-ray laser anti-rocket beams, MX cruise and Pershing missiles. In Dream, 10 years ago, over my head on a South Texas crossroad, a black cloud covered half the sky. I didn't remember who I was or where I came from. Tanks and bombers moved toward the distant horizon. We need not find a reason for being here. We are here already. There's no need to make excuses for being here. Nor are there any need to make excuses for having a body, having speech, or having a mind. The proposition is to work with them, to relate to them properly as sacred aspects of our world, and to inhabit them completely, and to manifest being here completely. But actually be here. Be here now, as they say, in hippie terms. That does not require an excuse for living with the senses, living with the cock, living with the eyes, living with the ears, living with the speech, living with touch, living with smell, living with mind. These are already given. Although it is true that in modern times, the machine and hyper-industrialization has begun to make people question their own existence. And the bomb is the culmination or acme of that question. Do we even want to exist? It is the bomb is kind of a death wish, as the old religious or existential questions of why, or I won't live until I have a reason. There is no reason to live. We are here already. It doesn't require a reason. We don't have to excuse ourselves. What I'm trying to do in my poetry is to manifest my own existence without excuses, as Walt Whitman suggested poets in the future do. That means, if you want to put it in terms of sensualizing the hyper-intellectualized, hyper-industrialized consciousness of modern mankind, we could put it in those terms if you want. I prefer something simpler that is less confusing to people, which is simply that we are here already and we need no excuse, neither from the government nor from God.
Okay, and how can poetry make that happen? How can poetry enable us to break through that veneer?
By manifesting the original primordial energy of our body and our speech and our mind, by manifesting a sense of majesty, dignity, accuracy, awakenedness, fearlessness, humor, and by being conscious of the vast space that exists already around us, of our presence in the presence of the vast space, which is unquestionable. You can question everything else, but you cannot question space. Space is immovable and endless. And the mind is also immovable and endless. The mind is space. Space is as vast as the mind, and the mind is as vast as space. Or, as Gregory Corso, American poet, says, a star is as far as my eye can see, and as near as my eye is to me. Einstein poetry.
Einstein poetry, that's right. Recent articles and reviews after the publication of the collected poems seem to suggest that you are history. And they ironize about the once angry young man having become a classic. Two questions I really have to you. What do you think about the co-optation of avant-garde and countercultural trends in our time by the mainstream or dominant culture, and the difficulties that this sort of presents to an individual poet writing and trying to be creative?
Well, I am happy that some of the ideas of the Beat Generation have now been understood by the public and adopted by them, whether you call it co-optation or evolution. Specifically, notions of liberation of the word from censorship in America, at least if not in other countries, so that Henry Miller and William Burroughs and my own poetry can be published without censorship. Jean Genet, D.H. Lawrence, many classics. Catullus, Shakespeare, finally can be published openly. From that spiritual liberation came liberation of the word. From what was originally spiritual liberation, liberation of the breath, spirit, unobstructed breath, came unobstructed mind and some sense of openness, and so areas which were considered forbidden will now be spoken of and written about realistically. So, question I think is answered, unless you wanted to ask me what does it feel like to be history or a classic? Is that the question also?
Sure, you could ask.
Well, I think I have that thought. There's a line in Shakespeare. Every third thought shall be my grave. Prospero, The Tempest. So I would say every 243rd thought is classic history. The rest of the time I am involved with making pee-pee, drinking water, eating, and writing poetry. So it is not a big problem. In fact, it's rather charming to have that thought occasionally. So it is not a problem to worry about this notion of being history or a classic. In fact, it is rather an adornment of the whole circle of awareness.
You seem to suggest here, or you at least touch upon a kind of a problem of accident in poetry, or the idea of accident.
It's not a problem.
Or chance, the idea of chance. I mean, something
It's not a problem.
that Ashbery talks about. It's
Yes.
something that certainly is important to you.
It relates, the notion of aleatoric or chance in art or spontaneity is related to the nature of the mind itself. That is the nature of the mind, spontaneous thought. And so art forms in this century tend to model themselves on the actual process of consciousness. And that includes the spaces or gaps in between thoughts. That is why such great classics as Ezra Pound's cantos, William Carlos Williams Patterson, are composed of ideograms or collage with one image set to another, next to another, without explanation. Just as in life, while we are talking here, there's the echo of dancing music from the picnic. Collage. While the sun is shining, a camera is moving, your mind is thinking, the fish are doing their own existence,
Fishing.
and oars are dipping into the springs that feed the stream. So, not a problem, but an advantage. To understand the nature of consciousness is to be aware. And to be aware is a situation where you can make use of the nature of things to compose art, which is a replica or mirror image of ultimate primordial nature. So
Which
then...
is spontaneous and chance. Chance?
No, nature was planned by a group of scientists in the 17th century.
Bravo.
Born in this world, born in this world, you got to suffer. Everything changes. You got no soul, you got no soul. Try to be gay, ignorant, happy. You get the blues. You eat jelly roll, you eat jelly roll. There is one way. Pom pom pa-da.
Stand up against governments, against God. Stay irresponsible. Say only what we know and imagine. Absolutes are coercion. Change is absolute. Ordinary mind includes eternal perceptions. Observe what is vivid. Notice what you notice. Catch yourself thinking. Vividness is self-selecting. If we don't show anyone, we're free to write anything. Remember the future. Freedom costs little in the United States. Advise only myself. Don't drink yourself to death. Two molecules that clank against each other require an observer to become scientific data. The measuring instrument determines the appearance of the phenomenal world. After Einstein, the universe is subjective. Walt Whitman celebrated person. We are observer, measuring instrument, I, subject, person. Inside skull is vast as outside skull. What is in between thoughts? Mind is outer space. What do we say to ourselves in bed at night in the dark? Making no sound? First thought, best thought. If the mind is shapely, the art will be shapely. Maximum information, minimum number of syllables. Syntax condensed, sound is solid. Intense fragments of spoken idiom best. Move with rhythm, roll ahead with vowels. Consonants around vowels make sense. Savor vowels. Appreciate consonants. Subject is known by what she sees. Others can measure their vision by what we see. Candor ends paranoia. Why don't you talk to me? You big jerk. You think you're famous? You think you got the Struga Festival Golden Wreath? Bum, bum, ba-da. You take the high road in your big wheel. 8 steps you fly, 8 steps you fly. Look at the view, look at the view. Right to horizon. Talk to the sky.